Okay, so do make sure that you listen to this video like any other in its entirety. I'm going to give you some really important warnings and tips that will apply to everyone's responses, no matter what kind of argument, no matter what argument you choose, no matter what kind of argument you yourself made. So make sure you listen to all of the video. A lot of what I say will apply to the other examples. And so I am going to try not to repeat myself in other examples when it comes to things that you generally need to know. I'm also going to go over specifics in this example. One thing that I might not have noted in the last video is that, remember, there is a requirement that I have that I added in another video with respect to the transition that there should be between step 2, copying and pasting your original responses, and the paragraph that begins your first discussion with respect to a similarity and then a difference. So remember, there's something that should be here as well. Again, I'm presenting step 2 only because I want you to see the original responses or arguments that my examples are drawing from. And then, of course, I have step 3 here. Keep in mind that below the second paragraph in the comparison, that's where the paragraph containing a question for your peer would be. All right, so that said, let's go ahead and cover both specifics of this example as well as general things that you need to keep in mind in terms of writing a response that will get a very good grade. Okay, so notice that in both of these paragraphs, I went ahead and bolded the first sentence. That's what we're going to do. We're going to bold the first sentence in each paragraph to make it just that much more obvious that the first sentence is telling the reader what it is they're going to focus on in that argument. So let's look at what I have here. One thing we have in common has to do with our definition for truth and how we use keywords within said definitions and the other reasons we provided for our identical conclusions. So in this one, we see they signal to us what the focus of this one will be. They say, one thing that is different about our arguments has to do with the fact that I make explicit how science plays or could play a role proving that a given claim about wearing a mask is true while you do not. Okay, so in terms of the instructions that I gave you for step 3A of task 3, you can see that in this example, it's very clear, it's very explicit that they have paid attention to what the very first sentence or couple of sentences should be about. So now let's focus on this particular paragraph, and when we're done looking at this paragraph, like I said, I'm going to make some really important points. Some of you are probably going to want to use this as a kind of example or template. You might want to talk about how you guys define free will, for example, or maybe some other definition if you happen to be working with an argument by definition. But there is, and to what extent you use it, but there's certain caveats. So make sure you listen to all of this video. So then next it says, I cited as a definition for truth the following from Merriam-Webster, : quotation mark. Then they've got the definition. So they're saying, hey man, when I responded to item 2, right, in the mandatory writing assignment from unit 1, this is what I gave as a definition for what? Truth. So again, they have the word truth in free will because they're letting us know, well, that's the word that they were defining. And then they put quotation marks, not because they're actually quoting directly from Webster, they're actually quoting themselves quoting, right, from what they said. So technically, let's see if the person put their, yeah, so they correctly put the definition in quotation marks. If you had not put quotation marks around your definition, but you did cite the source and or provide the URL, then I just took off points because you plagiarized. You had to put quotation marks around your definition, of course, and I did talk about that. But here, really what I should have is they're quoting themselves, quoting a definition, so really I need to have an extra mark there to note that. And then you see that they say, you cited the following from the dictionary, from the same dictionary, and then they have the quotation mark. So here I do not have, I mean, here you could do the extra quotation, right? So some of you should know, and you should really know by now if you're in a college class, even if you're a high school student, you are responsible for having this knowledge by the time you get here. Knowing when you use double quotations or like the single mark for quotation when you're quoting a quote. Okay, so the double quotation mark means I'm quoting something that I said. It just happens to be what I'm quoting is a quote. Okay, so now I want you to note, so I'm going to highlight some stuff just like that. It's not even highlighted, that's just my cursor. So notice that we have the first sentence. The first sentence tells us what? Are they going to focus on a similarity or difference? In this response, the example shows how you can mention the gist of what the similarity is going to be that will be discussed. Second, this example shows attention to the expectation that evidence, textual evidence from the actual arguments that were copied and pasted into the discussion board thread by replying to the thread, this shows that the directions are being followed here as well. So remember I said this is a kind of writing assignment that I invented as a whole when you add up all the steps and the parts. Maybe, I mean, if somebody else had you do this exact thing with exact layout with all the steps and all the parts, let me know. As far as I know, I invented this. But you can see that they paid attention. Okay, so then look at all the stuff in blue. The stuff in blue is actually where they are doing the most work. And that's what I talked about in a previous video, right? So they have all this discussion to unpack what it is that the two quotes are supposed to show about their argument. So what I want you to keep in mind is that what's going on with the thing in bold, that's basically a conclusion, right? And then what comes after that is reasoning. Now, what do I mean by that? Don't get too confused. So in other words, you are giving an argument to your peer about your arguments. So here you are providing an argument, right, about a similarity that you think is there when you compare your responses. So what's here in bold is in effect a conclusion. There is a similarity that has to do with this in this example. Okay, I'm going to show you different kinds of examples with different kinds of arguments. Then you have the initial reason statements. So the initial reason statements is in the form of evidence. So these reason statements that immediately follow the bold one are what you would call evidence. It is possible to have what we might call transitional sentences from the conclusion in bold, like what you're claiming is there, a similarity or a difference, and then to the quoted evidence. And I'll show you how that might be possible, but just keep in mind that you shouldn't really be discussing anything till after you've provided your evidence for your main claim, which is in the first sentence. So as you can see, you know, we're applying what we learned earlier, but in a different way. Whoa, right? Let's express some intellectual humility here. How many of you will admit that you did not know that you would be applying argument construction lessons to back up your claim about an argument? In other words, you're using our definition for argument, argument skills, prior argument knowledge in this class to talk about arguments, to make claims about arguments. This is really a higher level philosophical stuff. Okay, so then I want you to keep in mind that if all you have for, you know, a paragraph of similarity and a paragraph of difference, if you only have, you know, the main claim and then evidence, you will not qualify for rubric-based grading. You will get at best maybe 20 or 30 points for the whole assignment. This is really the meat, the intellectual work, where the intellectual work occurs when it comes to what you're doing. And hence, you got to reflect intellectual perseverance, guys. Remember, intellectual perseverance is all about, you know, harnessing, utilizing, manifesting all of your psychological and physiological resources to work through a complex cognitive task. That is what this assignment is doing. You can always make your better best, or you can always make your best better. You can always more highly develop your thinking skills, and that's what we're doing right now. Okay, so all this stuff in blue then is also what we would call reasons, okay? Reasons in support of the claim that is in black, that there's this similarity. And these reasons connect to the evidence cited to make a compelling case for what is in black. So that said, this is an example where somebody is saying, hey, the similarity that I'm going to talk about has to do with a definition that we provided for a word. And you can do that too. And so they cite the definitions, and then they focus on how the definitions have something in common themselves. Okay, so you can do that. Here's a warning, you need to write this down. What I don't want you to do is to, as your main claim, say, oh, Well, what we have in common is that we provided a definition or some definitions for the words, in the case of item 2, free will. Why? Because that's just what the assignment was. So things that I don't want you to focus on as your main claim for any paragraph is we both constructed arguments by definition. Don't focus on that as your main topic because that's just the assignment. That's what we're taking for granted. So everybody was supposed to do that. So that's not something interesting or compelling to focus on, but doing that would not also be the point given previous videos. Don't focus on the fact that you gave arguments by definition. Don't focus on the fact that you provided a definition. Don't focus on the fact that you provided a definition for the same word. Don't focus on supporting, don't focus on supporting the claim that you wrote an argument by definition. Don't focus on the fact that you both offer definitions in support of your conclusion. Don't focus on the fact or focus on supporting your claim with an emphasis on the fact that you have exactly the same definition or that you both embedded words from within your definition or definitions into your other reason statements. Why? Because again, that's what we take for granted. That's what everybody was supposed to do. So we're not interested in that. That's just following instructions from the videos and whatnot, okay? So please do not focus on that. Here, the reason why this is acceptable is because they're not making the claim, hey, the main point isn't what? Oh, we both included definitions for free will, right? No, it's that they have, that there's something that they have in common with respect to their definition. So it's not, well, here it's about truth, right? So they're not just saying, hey, my main point is that we provided definitions for truth. Rather, it's what? It has to do with our definitions for truth and how we use keywords from within said definitions. Now, it makes it seem at this point, right, like I'm contradicting myself. Like you said, well, you're not supposed to focus on how you both use keywords from within your definitions. That means, like, you can't just say, well, okay, we both did arguments from by definition. So we provided definitions for the same word, and then we embedded them in our statements. That would not be a good paragraph. This paragraph goes on to focus on what? How the keywords from the definitions are, how they use the same keywords within their definition. So they're going to explain, elaborate. They're not going to just say, basically, we followed the instructions or we made the same steps. They're going to get into the content of following the steps from the original argument. So they say, as you can see, we both chose definitions making use of fundamental and powerful concepts named by the following words: fact and reality in my definition, and reality and facts in your definition. So this is a really cool move to make, and you might be able to make this move even if you're not focusing on how you're using definitions and what you attach them to in your reasoning statement. What they do is they quote from their quoted evidence. So do you see how they're lifting these two words from the self-quote and these two words from the peer quote? That's really cool. They're unpacking the evidence, if you will. They say, as such, we can see that we both thought it important to choose a definition that connects the concept of a fact to reality. So here I have the words in quotation marks. Why? What did I say during Unit 1? Because we're not using the word, the speaker's not using the word, the writer's not using the word, they're mentioning the word. The words themselves are the topic of the sentence. But then they're using the word, okay, fact and reality throughout most of the rest of the paragraph. So just keep in mind the distinction between when you need to quote a word that you're talking about versus just using the word. In any case, if it has to do with keywords from within the definition, what you can do is highlight it to call attention to it. And so, yeah, definitely do that. So I'm not going to read through the rest of this. If you haven't read all of this, go ahead and read the rest of this now. I just want to call your attention to the fact that they really spend a lot of time then talking about how they each use the words real and fact in the reasoning statement. And so that's their emphasis. So you might be saying, well, they didn't use the words fact and real or reality or, factual in the same way. That's fine. Notice that in the paragraph, they don't focus on the differences. There might be differences implied, but the emphasis is on how they are similar. So you're not claiming when there's a similar or something that's alike or a comparison that they're exactly the same. So yeah, just in their discussion, some differences are noted, but that's not the point of the paragraph.